Been away for a couple of weeks in the US and sort of been watching this from afar, and it is struck me the extent to which the how jaundiced and odd some of this debate can be. Not least because you have a series of certain commentators and certain political figures who who actually have very eccentric, if not sometimes extremist views, seeking to portray themselves and their own views as somehow speaking indisputably for the entire country or for much of the country. And as part of that, what you're seeing with these riots here now, you've seen several people saying it to me on Twitter and elsewhere in the last 24 hours, that these are people who are representing what ordinary working class people think. This is nonsense. It is completely legitimate and understandable, with the asylum system out of control and with immigration at a near all-time high, for there to be legitimate concerns and worries for people across the country about integration, about immigration, about all of those things. Completely legitimate. That is not far right, and anybody who suggests that it is completely wrong. What is indisputably far right is disliking or indeed hating people on the basis of their ethnicity, of suggesting, and it's a deeply power-like vision, of suggesting that just because of someone's religion or their ethnicity or their background, that they're somehow incapable of integrating within the British whole and the British community. And also, by the way, it's completely ahistorical and completely counterfactual as well, completely just wrong, because we've seen that over decade after decade after decade of actually Britain being a real success story in terms of integration. And it is completely outrageous and ridiculous and offensive to working class people in this country to suggest that somehow the rioters who are being inspired by sort of far-right groups across the country in a kind of diffuse kind of way, that those rioters, those people who are saying such offensive things and burning down shops and engaging in thuggery, are in any kind of way representative of ordinary working class English people. I'll tell you this right now, the vast majority of English working class people across this country will abhor stuff like that, would have no truck or part in it whatsoever. And it's usually middle class, sort of very out of touch right-wing commentators who will suggest to you that they are somehow representative just because they happen to align with what they think. And this is not very difficult. It is very, very clear what is far right and what isn't. And as I say, disliking or hating people on the basis of their ethnicity or nationality, disliking or spreading misinformation and tropes which are wrong and you know to be wrong just to serve your political purposes, that is far right as well. This is not difficult and not complicated to get your head around, and it is only a result of certain types of people online who have a certain political agenda to try and bear and to try and prosecute. Home Secretary, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Obviously, newspapers, campaign, day 4, whatever it is, dominated by the national service idea which you've put forward. What problem is it attempting to solve exactly?
Well, one of the things that we have seen is, I think, a fragmentation across the country. So many people, particularly young people, living very much within their bubble, for want of a better word. And we see the implications of that with a kind of a coarseness in the national debate and the conversations. And what we are looking to do is find ways of bringing people together. That's why the compulsory element is so important, because we want to make sure that whether you are from a very wealthy background or a less wealthy family, irrespective of your class, your race, your religion, your geography, that you take part in this kind of shared endeavor. And look, hopefully this will also kickstart a generation of people who maintain a lifelong commitment to volunteering. That would be fantastic as well. So there is a phenomenon that we've seen increasing, and we want to take action to reverse that.
But what's the evidence that that particularly afflicts young people? I mean, the coarseness you're talking about afflicts the whole population. I mean, I do an LBC show. I get a lot of very coarse older people ringing me up. Maybe we should extend compulsory national service to them.
Well, the point is that we as I say, we're trying to build a multi-generational habit, and we are planning for the future. We have a plan for the future. This is part of it. It's about making bold decisions for the long-term benefit of society as a whole. This is part of it. I've loved my time in the reserve forces, and obviously there is a military element to this national service. The military element will be voluntary. The taking part in the national service scheme will be
I,
compulsory, but the military bit will be voluntary.
I thought
Everyone that
conservatism, Home Secretary, was about freedom. It's not really, and about liberty. There's not really much freedom in
conservative
forcing adults to do something they don't want to do.
conservatism is not and has never been about laissez-faire. What this is about having a plan to deal with the challenges that societies face, and conservatives have always done that. And what we're saying is that the, as I say, the military element of it will be
Mm.
competitive, but people will need to volunteer to do that bit. But overall, this is about making sure that we have a society which gels together, is at ease with itself, maintains the wonderful, diversity that makes our country so fantastic. It's protecting what we value, and that is right at the heart of conservative
How
philosophy.
long has the Prime Minister been convinced of the merits of National Service, Home Secretary? I was looking at Hansard this morning. I can't find a single reference to his ever talking about National Service or conscription in Parliament. Not once. When did he talk to you about it? When did he become convinced of it?
So we have, as a party, had a conversation in various forms around this for quite some time. When I was at City Hall back in 2008, we had a project called Time for Action, which was dealing with youth policy in London, and support for voluntary youth groups and uniform youth groups was part of that. We were the party that introduced National Citizen Service. So
Mm.
this is part of a
And
long-standing.
it was the Prime Minister when he was
And
Chancellor who cut the funding for the National Citizen Service by two-thirds. So if he thought it was such a good idea, citizen service for young people, why did he cut its funding so substantially?
Well, one of the things that the Prime Minister had to do was take difficult and bold decisions to make sure the public finances were balanced. And what we have seen, his time in Chancellor, he brought in furlough to protect livelihoods as well as lives during COVID. And he took tough action, which has meant that our inflation levels
Mm.
now down from over 11% back to normality. So he's very conscious that you need to make the right decisions at the right
Well,
time.
maybe it was because it was a failure. I mean, that National Citizen Service followed an investigation independent, found the scheme consistently failed to meet government targets, delivered value for money. Executives were being handed six-figure salaries despite dwindling youth participation, and a former board member said the programme was little more than, quote, a holiday camp for mostly middle-class kids. Why will your scheme be any better than that?
Because everyone will be involved. There was some really good ideas that underpin national citizen service, but the thing that really makes this national service scheme different, and what I think will make it really, really key, is that everybody will be involved, and it won't just be for middle class kids. It will be for everybody, and the wealthy will mix with the less wealthy. People of different religions will mix with each other. People of different backgrounds, different viewpoints, different politics will all mix with each other, and remind ourselves that we have much more in common. Remind ourselves why this is. I have no doubt. I've no hesitation in saying the UK best country in the world. We want to keep it that way. That's what we want to preserve, and we preserve it by addressing what we've seen, sadly, is this kind of fragmentation
Mm.
that has driven social friction, and that we're seeking to address that.
What if you don't want to do it? What happens to you if you're 18? You say, I don't want to volunteer. I don't want to join the army. I've got other plans. What happens?
So it will be compulsory. We will look at what the appropriate response will
Could you get
be.
arrested?
Use that. No, it's not going to be. There's not going to be a criminal sanction for
Okay.
this.
So
And when we
where will the compulsion come then?
well, in the same way that people are compelled to be in educational training between 16 and 18. There are lots of structures where
But
we
then,
compel.
but isn't the sanction then that your parents then will face sanction if you don't send your kids to school? In this case, you'll be an adult. So what
So we
happens
know
to you?
it's not to the point. It's not a criminal sanction. Also, what we have decided to do is make sure that, because we want this to continue, we don't want this to be a party political football. We're going to put forward a royal commission, which will make sure that the details, those kind of balancing details, are clearly thought through, depoliticized, so this will endure. But
Right.
this follows the example of a number of other countries where they have a mix of military but predominantly
Sure.
non-military
Will you
national
will you
service.
get paid if you're doing the volunteering bit of it?
If you're doing the military bit, you will get paid. If you're doing the non-military bit, you won't.
Which will be most of the young people, because the
Most
military
of,
bit
yeah, most
is
of
quite a
them.
small.
The
So
reason
so you're gonna have to work for free when you're an
the
adult. You're gonna have to
military
work for
bit
free.
The military bit will be a year-long commitment.
Yeah.
The non-military bit will be 25 days over a year, which typically we envisage being split up in 2-day chunks. There may be other structures, and again, the Royal
But if
Commission
you're
can have.
18, you can go and join the police. You can become a prison officer. So you, as a newly minted police officer or prison officer or whatever, prison guard, you're going to have to be giving up by law some proportion of your free time to do this, to work for free.
Well, I know lots of police officers, lots of soldiers, lots of people that work in public service also volunteering their time.
Yes,
And again,
volunteer, because volunteer means you want to
the
do
other,
it, not that you're forced to
but the
do it for free.
but Lewis, the point we're making is a really important element of this is that mixing with people from outside your traditional
What's that got to
social.
do with you? What's that got to do with you, Home Secretary? You're a Conservative
Ideal,
government. You're a Conservative. Leave people alone to live their own lives. You talk about the nanny state. That's the ultimate nanny state, telling people with whom they should mix.
Because I deal with the repercussions of social fragmentation. When we have protests on the streets of London where different groups of people
That's about Gaza.
have fallen out of the habit of talking to each other, fallen out of the habit of respecting differential political point of views. I deal with the implications of that. And where there is an opportunity to remedy that, of course, it is right we take that opportunity to. And if people are saying they don't want to take this course of action, fine. Elections are about choices. And the Labour Party thus far, who would be the alternative party of government, perhaps propped up by others, but the likely alternative party of government, I don't see have brought forward any issues to address this fragmentation in society. So we've got a plan, and the plan is designed to make sure that we do what we can to address these fractures and the kind
Sure.
of
Why is it always young people at the sharp edge of your policies, Home Secretary? I mean, can you understand that if you're a young person, you might be forgiven for thinking that the Conservative Party doesn't like me very much? You know, you triple their tuition. You triple their. Well, let me finish. You triple their tuition fees. You took their right to go and work and study in Europe without impediment away. You didn't fund their education pandemic recovery plan properly because your Prime Minister, when he was Chancellor, said you didn't want to find the money. But now you have found the money to make them go and do something when they're fully grown adults at the weekends, or to make them join the military.
The Conservative Party has always been a party that's had a plan for the long term of the country. We are investing in young people. We are trying to address some of the challenges, some of the difficulties that young people face. I speak to young people a lot, always have done. My first role in politics was on youth policy at City Hall in London. And when you've heard people say, when I was in London, I heard people say they didn't mix with kids from the next door postcode. You can do one of two things. You can have
pensioners don't do that, Home Secretary. Pensioners don't mix with people in the next door postcode. It doesn't mean you're forcing them to go and mix with people.
You can, if you're asking me questions.
I am, but I'm just trying to explore the logic of it, Home Secretary. I'm just wondering why it's young people specifically at the sharp edge.
This is something where we're investing in young people. We do that all the time. Our education structure is about investing in young people. An investment in young people is a smart move, and it is a smart move not just for the here and now, but for the long term, because again, stimulates lifelong habits. This is something which I have no doubt, because in the other countries that we've looked at that do this is a very, very popular scheme. Parents particularly very, very keen for their children to be involved in this kind of stuff. You're making it sound like a negative. This is a positive, and a massive positive. And I'm genuinely a bit shocked that you and a few others seem to be upset with the idea of investing £2.5 billion in the future generations of this country.
Well, some people might say, Home Secretary, that £2.5 billion would have been better spent on the pandemic recovery plan. But I just want to move on to your own area, which is, of course,
was that a question?
No. I'm just saying that there are plenty of people as part of political debate who might well think that the money could be better used. But anyway, I just want to ask you about your own area, Home Secretary, which is, of course, small boats in the border. Obviously, Rwanda is going to be a big part of this campaign. Is the Rwanda plan, are there going to be any Rwanda flights taking up before the general election?
Well, the Prime Minister has said that the first round of flights are earmarked for just after the general election. We are still doing the preparatory work for that. We have not paused that. The Labour Party have said they will scrap the plan, even though we have invested in the infrastructure and the capability development in Rwanda, and even though we are progressing the scheme. And Rwanda will be part of a number of measures that we're putting forward, including the Small Boats Operational Command, which is already in existence, already up and running, already doing multi-agency work, and already liaising with European law enforcement agencies. Labour's grand plan for migration is to, as far as I can make out, change the name of the organisation that General Duncan Capps already commands, doing exactly what they said that they would do with their new border command, or whatever they're calling it. So they're suggesting they're going to do less than we're doing. And we recognise this is a challenge. It's a challenge faced by European countries and other countries around the world. And we're not claiming it's easy, but you need to have a number of strands, including a deterrent, because you can't return people to Syria. You can't return people to Afghanistan.
Understood, and I know that's the argument. I just want to clarify. Well, we don't know for sure. We don't know if
you don't have a country like Rwanda to send them to.
Sure.
Labour will inevitably have to have an amnesty.
And I'm going to ask them about that on the show today, Home Secretary. Fear not. I just wanted to just clarify and confirm. You don't know. You can't guarantee that there will be a flight taking off before the general election day, July the 4th.
No, we've said there is not going to be one.
There's not going to be one, so there's no possibility of that happening.
What we're saying is we're working to flights immediately after the general election. The planning is happening. The operations are happening. We continue to be liaising closely with the Rwandans, who are the receiving nation, and the process.
Fine.
A Labour government would turn off all that work. And a Conservative government would ensure that those flights take off immediately after the general election.
And on net, just finally, Home Secretary, on net migration, obviously we saw the figures this week, not as high as the year before, but still very, very, very high by historic standards. When can we expect, there's another Conservative government, so you'll have been in for nearly 20 years by then, by the end of the next Parliament, what sort of figures do you want to see them return to? Are we talking to the couple of 100,000 where they were before Brexit, lower than that, the tens of thousands? What sort of number should they be?
So it's worth bearing in mind that part of, not the whole reason, but part of the reason why our legal migration figures have increased significantly is because of the work that we've done hosting Ukrainian refugees. Sure. Those count against the figures, and the very, very important and generous offer we put to British national Hong Kong Chinese so that they could come to the UK and move from China because of the oppression that they were feeling by the Chinese state. So that is part of the reason. There are other things which have led to higher numbers than we're comfortable with, which is why immediately upon being appointed, I took action. And as you said in your intro question, those numbers are now coming down. We have a plan to continue reducing those. But you've got to remember that the Labour Party, who are, as I say, the alternative proposition at this election, have voted over 130 times against all our border control measures, opposed the changes that we made to the visa regime, which has seen those numbers come down. And yet at this election, they will try and claim that they are a party committed to reducing migration, where none of their actions reinforce that claim. And at elections, I think the Labour Party do have a duty to be open and honest. And there really is a lack of honesty, whether it's on that small boats command or that border command, where they're not being honest about the fact it already exists, when they are claiming to be the party that wants to control migration, when they voted against all the migration measures that we put forward. They are just not being honest on this incredibly important issue. Nobody is claiming that it is simple, but we are implementing a plan, and the Labour Party do not have one.
Home Secretary, grateful for your time. Thanks so much.
Lewis, thank you very much.
Currently, NATO is prepared to press the red button, press the nuclear button first. And so we would be pushing for a no first use policy because there is no sane or ethical justification for ever being the aggressor with nuclear weapons.
Seems highly unlikely that a NATO state would ever fire a nuclear weapon first, wouldn't it?
We have to remember that the vast majority of NATO members don't even have nuclear weapons.
No, and that's why they want us to retain ours.
Yes, and that's an area where the Green Party differs from other parties, because we're clear that, as well as costing an absolute arm and a leg, our nuclear weapons do not make us safer. In fact, they make us a target. They make us more.
But then why do countries, other NATO members, Eastern European countries, for example, do they want us to keep our nuclear weapons then?
Well, it probably suits them for us to have them rather than them. I mean, that's the fact is that at the moment we have nuclear weapons. We're spending a huge amount of the government's budget on that when it could be being spent on measures to fix our crumbling schools and our crumbling NHS.
But in an era when, of course, those are important things. But in an era when Vladimir Putin is so threatening our own continent, surely it would be mad at this moment to give up our nuclear weapons.
I should emphasise that what I'm talking about is moving towards a nuclear-free future, not turning them off tomorrow morning. But
at any point.
Well, there are ways to build towards peace. And the trouble with nuclear weapons is that they just don't tackle the biggest threats that we're facing in the world. I mean, they don't help with terrorism. If a terrorist is going to hijack a vehicle and use that as a weapon,
but
nuclear
the biggest
weapons
threat
don't
in the
help us
world
with
right
that.
now is Russia, surely.
Cyber threats, it doesn't help with that. And of course, the biggest threat facing humanity, which militaries all over the world are taking very seriously, is climate change. And I find it reassuring that militaries are taking this seriously, because they understand that if we don't tackle it, it's going to cause conflict, famine, and create millions of refugees.
But I mean, Ukraine gave up their nuclear weapons and then they got invaded.
Ukraine are in a very different situation to the United Kingdom.
Yeah, but I mean, you won't find a Ukrainian now who wishes they didn't retain their nuclear weapons.
I think that's a very different situation to the situation the UK is in now, where we are making ourselves a target by being one of the countries that does have nuclear weapons and starting to host US nuclear weapons on our soil too.
You think we would be less of a target if we didn't have nuclear weapons?
As I said, the vast majority of NATO countries don't have nuclear weapons. So this would be a case of the UK joining those.
Poland doesn't have nuclear weapons. It's still a target. Eastern Europe, surely we're not more of a target. We would still remain a target of Russia or whoever. If we have nuclear weapons or not, we'll just be more exposed.
Going back to first principles, like what are the circumstances that pressing the red button would solve?
Well,
I can't think of any.
It's a deterrent.
I don't think that the argument for a deterrent is very effective. It to me,
but isn't it a risk? I mean, maybe you're right, but it's a risk, isn't it? It's a risk. You wouldn't want to take a risk right now. It's such a risky moment. Russia is a revanchist power that is threatening its states. We are part of NATO. Surely the last thing that we should be doing, is taking a risk with our national security right now.
The argument for having nuclear weapons only as a deterrent reminds me strongly of the argument that you tragically hear young people giving sometimes for why they carry a knife. They say they're doing it to protect themselves, and they truly believe that. But the fact is that those who carry knives are more likely to be stabbed, sometimes by their own knife. Defending yourself, thinking that it's a deterrent like that.
We're not going to nuke ourselves, are we?
No, but it makes us a target, as I say.
Okay. I mean, I want to talk about other things because there are many other important matters. But just on Ukraine, because obviously you could be in Parliament and you'll have an influence in terms of what we do next. We're sending a lot of money and armaments to Ukraine. Is that something that your party supports?
Yeah, Ukraine has an absolute right to defend itself when it's receiving attacks onto its sovereign territory, and so yeah, I do support the assistance that the UK and other countries are providing.
Let's talk a little bit about a policy that came up quite a lot this week that I know upset quite a lot of people, and I know that you'll want to just refer to it since we're here. There was a bit of controversy you'll have seen about a policy which I know your party is now saying it was historic, but saying that childbirth is a non-medical event and we should be reducing the number of C-sections. How did that happen?
So first of all, to be clear, that policy is not going to be in our manifesto and was never going to be in our manifesto. I think it was a quite out-of-date policy that was adopted some time ago when I think the mainstream medical opinion was somewhat different to what it is now. A little bit first to explain how our policy setting process works. The Green Party is a very internally democratic party, so our policies are set one member, one vote at our conference. And unlike the other parties, we we make those policies
available.
You are
very democratic.
But it does mean that sometimes policies that are not a priority but which have not technically been removed from the policy book may still be there. But
because there was a suggestion it was
updated
in April, as recently as April. Is that right?
I don't think that's true. I think that was when the entire website was last updated rather than that policy. But the bottom line is that in maternity and childbirth, as in all healthcare, what's really important is that people, women in this case, have the right to choose. With expert advice, they have the right to choose what is best for them.
In terms of what the lawyer to the court for South Africa said yesterday, Adila Hassim, one of the lawyers there, when he said that quote, as I just said, every day there is mounting irreparable loss of life, property, dignity and humanity for the Palestinian people. There can be no arguing with that, can there?
I think the South African case is very sad because they basically decided to become Hamas's lawyer. And I paid very close attention to what they said yesterday. And it's as if they mentioned Hamas just to tick the box, so to speak. They mentioned Hamas and they acknowledged that maybe Hamas did some bad things on October 7th. But the fact that there's a war going on between Israel and Hamas is totally forgotten. It's as if Israel is acting in a vacuum in Gaza, that Israel is not acting within the right of every country to self-defense.
Well, but Mr. Regev, as you know, yes, of course Israel has a right to self-defense, but as you know, as a state, and particularly as a signatory to the convention, Israel does not have an unqualified right of self-defense. And what the South Africans are saying, and as you know, they are supported by other states around the world, what they're saying is the
Iran and Syria,
and other countries in the global south, and, even your allies, including the United States and the United Kingdom, who have stood four square behind you in many ways, have expressed concerns about Israel's behaviour. We saw Lord Cameron, the Foreign Secretary, the other day, saying that he is worried that there may have been a contravention of international humanitarian law by your state in Israel. So this is the point. Of course you have a right to self-defense. The question is how you're prosecuting and using that right. And the accusation from South Africa and others to you is that you are abusing that right.
So, Lewis, let's be clear. I'm willing to have a serious conversation with the Brits, with the Americans about Israel's tactics. We're always willing to hear the thoughts of our friends and to engage, and can we do a better job? That's a good conversation to have, but that's not what the South Africans are doing. The South Africans have adopted full, life, how do you say it, in total, the Hamas narrative, and they're accusing Israel of genocide. And there, the British government, the American government, other Western governments have stood up and said, this is just simply not true. This is a baseless claim. I think the Americans said this is without any merit. And you have to distinguish between what is a valid argument, a valid discussion about our tactics, and we're always, as I said, willing to hear and learn from our friends and allies. But this charge of genocide is totally preposterous. It's outrageous.
But Mr. Regev, isn't it the point that you have laid yourself open to that accusation in the manner in which you've conducted this war? 85% of Gaza's population have been displaced. The World Food Programme has said that 80% of the most hungry people in the world right now are in Gaza. That directly arises from the way in which you have prosecuted not just the war, but the way in which you have dealt with the humanitarian situation in Gaza. This was not the only way you could have conducted this war. That is the point. There were other options to you. You have not availed yourself of those options.
Well, with your permission, I'll address what you raised in your question. It's true that a large proportion, 85% of the population has been displaced. But why were they displaced? Because we asked them to leave areas of combat so they'd get out of harm's way. That has been documented.
And 20,000 Gazans have died. Over 20,000.
Well, those are Hamas's figures. They don't say how many of them are combatants, how many of them are civilians. They want you to believe, and South Africa in the court wants you to believe that they're all innocent civilians when that's clearly not true.
But there will be many innocent civilians, will there not?
Well, can you name, Lewis, and you're a student of history, can you tell me one war in modern history where civilians haven't been caught up in the crossfire?
No, but I can't.
Are you not holding,
not
holding Israel to a standard that no one else is held to?
No, I'm holding you to a standard that is that of a modern state, democratic state, and that is better than Hamas and better than others who would seek to attack Israel. And I can't think, I have to say, of a war in which 85% of a whole population have been displaced. I can't think of a war where over 100 journalists have been killed in only 3 months. I can't think of a war I can't think of a war, and that's from the American Committee to Protect Journalists figures, by the way. They're not my figures, and I can't think of a war.
Lewis, but let's be clear. If you talk about the journalists, let's first of all state the obvious fact that Israel is the only country in the region that protects and defends the freedom of the press. We're the only country that has a press that can criticize the government. Hamas, of course, allows no free press whatsoever. So to predict or to portray Israel as some enemy of the free press is frankly ridiculous, especially when you compare who we're fighting against.
Well,
but to be clear, on the first day of this war, on October 7th, when Hamas invaded our country with its army of terror and randomly killed people, they killed journalists.
Of course, they're appalling. But
did they kill them because they were journalists? They didn't kill them because they were journalists. They killed them because they were Israelis. They could have been bakers. They could have been farmers. They could have been doctors. Hamas killed everyone indiscriminately.
And that was completely appalling, and I would be the first one to
Correct.
say it. Nonetheless, we're talking about what has happened since, and of course,
But to say that
you would hold
Israel is
yourself to a
deliberately
high...
targeting Hamas propaganda, would you have you believe Israel deliberately targets journalists? That's just not true.
I didn't
That's
mention.
just not true.
I didn't suggest that you were deliberately targeting them, but what I am saying is that it is a mark of just how severe and how profound the situation in Gaza is that so many journalists have been killed in such a short period. More journalists have been killed in 3 months of Israel's war on Gaza than in all of World War II or the Vietnam War. In 2022, which is when the invasion happened, 15 journalists and media workers were killed in Ukraine. In the whole of 2022, over 100 have died in 3 months. That is, I mean, the journalists are just a small part of all of this, but that is a sign of just how profound and totalizing Israel's action against the civilian population of Gaza has been.
Israel's operation is against the Hamas military machine.
Yes,
it's not against the civilians.
But the result, whether you say that it is against them or otherwise, the result is the same. The result has been the same.
But you're making a logical fallacy here. You're saying all the civilian deaths in Gaza are on Israel's hands. That's 100% not true.
Well, they wouldn't be dead if it wasn't for Israeli rockets.
No, they wouldn't be dead if Hamas hadn't had a deliberate policy, and not just Israel says so, the EU says so, the UK says so, the US says so, others say so, of deliberately using Gazan civilians as a human shield for its military machine. I mean, you've had on this program discussions about Hamas's use of hospitals for its military machine, its use of schools, its use of residential neighborhoods. You see Gaza above. Below Gaza, there is a subterranean network of military tunnels and launching sites for rockets and command and control. Hamas leaders today are under the city of Khan Yunis. We're trying to get them. But
so when
South
humans,
Africa, in their indictment, ignores that. It's like Israel is there alone.
There is no doubt. There is no doubt that Hamas are terrible people and that they have used their own civilians as human shields. There's no doubt about that. So but you're saying, therefore, that when humans become human shields, that means they are just legitimate collateral damage in war, and you have no obligation to them at all.
I never said that.
That's the logical.
I never said that.
That's your logical fallacy. That is what
it wasn't my
that is the
logic.
logical inference of what you're saying.
No.
Well, so you have no
whatsoever.
But you're saying that if they've died, you're saying that if those civilians have died, it's as a result of the fact that Hamas have used them as human shields, despite the fact that obviously they've died as a result of your attacks, your rockets, and so on. So what is your moral obligation to those people?
No, but
Mr.
when you
Regev?
say to me, when you throw to me the Hamas number that over 20,000 people have died, right?
Well, the UN.
It's clear they're not all civilians. It's clear they're not all civilians.
Yeah.
It's clear they're not all civilians. It's clear also a large part of the civilians died from Hamas tactics and Hamas munitions. And therefore, once again, I'm willing to have a serious discussion about Israeli strategy. But this South African approach, which is basically they've decided to be the lawyer of the Hamas terrorist movement, that's what they're doing, which says Israel is guilty of genocide without understanding that we're in a war, without understanding the difficult combat conditions, without understanding Hamas's strategy of using Gaza civilians as a human shield. It's like out of fantasy land. It's like it's divorced from reality.
If let's imagine a situation in which the ICJ decides that you are guilty of perpetrating a genocide. Would that make any difference to what Israel is doing?
My understanding of the court system is it'll be maybe up to 2 or 3 years before we finally get a result from the court. But I have to tell you, there are questions raised, like people came to us and said, why are you testifying in the court? And raised questions, and we've decided to go. But let's be clear, the court contains judges who don't come from countries with independent judiciaries, where you can expect the judge.
Then why are you a signatory to the convention if you do think the whole thing's a waste of time?
We are, and that's why we're there in the end. I'm just raising questions that become relevant when looking at the court. I'd ask you a question. There's a Lebanese judge on the panel. I mean, if he voted against the indictment, who knows what could happen to him in Lebanon? Yes, there's all sorts of considerations that need to be thought about.
So your signatory...
We have a strong case. We're making that case today. I hope you have a chance to watch You're broadcasting now, and it's going on as we speak. But I think Israel's case is very, very strong, and people who are independent-minded who are legal scholars and just normal people with a sense of justice will hear the Israeli side of this case and understand that the South African allegation is baseless.
So, but to be clear, whenever it were to conclude, whether it's 2 years, 3 years' time, the Israeli government wouldn't accept what it said because you are suggesting that it is not a proper institution or that the process is flawed in some way.
I never said that.
So you would accept it? You would accept it?
I just point, look, the whole UN system, as you know, and as the British government has said, there's institutional bias in the UN against Israel.
Sounds, Mr. Regev, like it sounds like, Mr. Regev, you're just trying to discredit the institution in advance of anything it might say, which sounds like a sort of strategic decision for your government to do so.
Lewis, it's not Mark Regev and the Israeli government who've talked about UN bias against Israel. Kofi Annan, a former Secretary General, admitted as much. Ban Ki-moon publicly addressed the issue. The trouble today is the current Secretary General, instead of combating institutional bias within his organization, seems to embrace it.
If you think that your case is so strong, why do you feel the need to try and discredit the institution? Why wouldn't you just say, well, the ICJ will doubtless come down on our side because our case is strong enough and it will clearly be compelling?
Because I'm aware of the institutional bias in the UN. I mean, you have all these votes in the United Nations where these automatic majorities against Israel. It happens almost routinely.
Well, perhaps that's because world opinion is not on your side.
The UK government has spoken publicly about the issue of bias in UN institutions. It's not new. To deny that is to deny reality.
Using that phrase, the dust settles there. It feels so astonishing sometimes in politics, doesn't it? That we are so often, there is such glacial change. We tend to have very long periods of single-party government in this country. Remember, we've only changed party government 3 times since 1979 before Thursday. Now it's a 4th. Add it to the roll call. 1979, 1997, 2010 and 2024. And another roll call as well. That for Keir Starmer, who has achieved an achievement which very few men, and they have all been men so far, have done, only 7 of them, to become a Labour Prime Minister, something that this country rarely does, elect a non-Conservative leader. He can add his name to the roll call of Ramsay MacDonald, Clement Attlee, Harold Wilson, Jim Callaghan, Tony Blair, Gordon Brown and Keir Starmer. And he's done so with aplomb. 411 members of parliament, up from barely 200 in 2019. 335, I should say, new Labour, new MPs overall, 209 of those being Labour. The Conservative Party reduced to a rump, reduced to only 121 members of parliament. The Conservative Party has never been so marginal nor unimportant in the entire history of British parliamentary politics. Let that sink in. I don't think it will have done for many Conservative MPs yet, those who remain, nor potential leadership candidates. They don't matter very much anymore, at least for the next 4 to 5 years. Nor also, in Westminster terms at least, to the Scottish National Party, reduced to, 10 MPs or so? Barely anything by comparison to the 50 they had in the previous Parliament, dominant as they have been since 2015 at Westminster. Again, the Labour Party seeing off all before them. There are, of course, wrinkles in this victory, though, as we see the Prime Minister go off to Scotland today and then Wales as well, and of course lots of international travel to come. Wrinkles in the sense that it is a landslide which some people have called loveless, in the sense that they've achieved it on the smallest proportion of the vote in history, with the lowest turnout since 2001, the second lowest turnout since 1885. That does matter, and it does pose questions and problems for how this Labour government will govern and their political strategy going up to the next general election. But you have to say, that feels a very long way away right now. We in Britain are going to, and indeed in politics generally, are going to have to get used to something we have not experienced for a long time. A single-party government with a majority which is completely unassailable, or virtually unassailable in Parliament. That will give this government depth and stability in a way we have not seen perhaps for 2 decades, for 15 years at least. This government, Keir Starmer, can do what he wants. What will he do with it? We're going to try and answer that question on the show today. I want your views on how Keir Starmer is going so far, what you want to see from him in the first week of the new Labour government. 0345 6060 973, 0345 6060 973, text 84850. We'll be talking to a new cabinet minister from the Labour Party. We'll be talking to the Conservative Party as well, the SNP. everything, a smorgasbord of politics on the show today. But let's kick off with Natasha Clark, LBC political editor, who, of course, has been, like myself, following every twist and turn of this election. We're still here, Natasha, just about.
We're still standing.
We're still standing, unlike the Conservative Party. No. Bad joke.
Too soon,
yeah. So Natasha was saying, dust is settled, new Prime Minister in office, and he's had a busy start, hasn't he?
He has, and, out, to be fair to him, out in front of the press, answering every single question at that press conference yesterday. He's obviously been appointing his new cabinet, and we should expect more of that today. He's also doing this Four Nations tour. Labour, as soon as they knew that they had won and were on the way into Downing Street, were very keen to press to us journalists that this is not just a win for England, but also for Scotland and Wales as well. He wants to be that Prime Minister of all four nations, so he's going to be visiting that all in the next 24 hours, we're told.
Also, he said something slightly odd, I thought, at his press yesterday when he said he'd received a mandate from all four nations, despite the fact that, of course, Labour Party doesn't stand.
Exactly, just the three.
Yeah.
But yes,
don't get too ahead of yourself here.
Next time, though, 2029, Labour Party could be taking that too. But look, yes, he's very keen to make it that he is the Prime Minister, and he's got that mandate, despite obviously what you said about the lower turnout, lower vote share. He wants to be clear that his mandate, 180 seat majority, is his across the United Kingdom. And obviously now it is for him to set out what he's going to do with it. We obviously have had those 6 steps is the shape of that policy. But in the next few days, we hope and we expect to see from him a bit more about the flesh on the bones. And I think we will see a little bit of that this week, going into it with obviously his first international foreign trips as well. He's going to go to NATO next week. We're going to be hearing more about defence spending. We're going to be hearing more about when that 2.5% of defence spending is going to be met. He's obviously going to have to order that review that he long promised. And of course, the economy, he's said that that's going to be the foremost, growing the economy is going to be the number one mission for this Labour government. I expect we'll hear more from Rachel Reeves in the coming hours and days about exactly how she is going to start growing the economy again.
The critique about low turnout and a seat distribution, or a vote distribution, I should say, which was sort of wide but not deep. I mean, how fair do you think that criticism is, and how much do you think it actually bothers the new Labour government?
If you've got a 180-seat Labour majority, Lewis, would you be bothered about that at all?
Well,
I don't think so. I think for now, they are literally now focused on the job that is just in front of them. Yes. I think for later on, for sure, it's a back of the mind thought, as will be the fact that Reform came second in so many seats. I think 89 Labour seats they came second in. That will be a thought for later on when they're thinking about the next 5 years. But for now, it is just getting on with the job in front of them and the things that they need to do. But having that huge majority, I don't think it's going to be a foremost in their mind, thinking, oh, our vote share was quite shallow. Oh, what are we going to do next time? They know that they've not got very long to prove themselves, to get out there, to do the things that they said they would, or else risking a huge damage in trust in democracy. Because if people can't start to see this change immediately, there will be a huge lack of trust in the government, in our democratic system, and they know they need to get on with it.
And there is no hiding place now, right? I mean, I was saying just now, we've not had a government for a long time. People talked about Boris Johnson's massive majority. I mean, it was a big majority. It was 80, but it wasn't.
We're not got an extra 100.
Yeah, but it wasn't unassailable. You only needed 40 Tory MPs to rebel, and we saw that a few times in the last Parliament. I mean, there's almost no prospect of the government losing any vote with a majority like that. It would have to be something incredibly controversial within the Labour Party itself.
And remember, obviously, Starmer, put all these candidates up in his own image. They are mostly Starmer.
They want jobs. They want jobs. Most of them, they're not going to be mavericks to begin with, at least anyway. My point is that there's no hiding place. It's now all Starmer. Yes, he's going to talk a lot about his inheritance. He's going to say it's a mess. He's doubtless they're going to say it was even worse than we thought, and so on. But ultimately, it's the buck stops with him now, and there's no excuses in parliamentary terms.
Exactly. He's now really just got to get on with all of the things that he said he was going to do. And I think, obviously, we had a lot of criticism from him in the campaign, not least from the Conservatives, but also from voters. We're not sure what Keir Starmer is exactly going to do. He now needs to set that out, and he needs to set that out very clearly. But equally, he does need to just literally get on with it. He's now got the majority to do it. He has got a mandate. It doesn't matter how shallow or deep it is. He has got that mandate. He's got those MPs. Yep. Will he face pressure from Reform? Of course he will. Will he face pressure from the Liberal Democrats?
And Farage will be in Parliament. I mean, I think we probably underestimate that. He was able to make great hay in the European Parliament. He's very good at using parliamentary procedure, of using the kind of the bear pit of a parliament that he's sat in. He'll get those clips. He'll be attacking Starmer on immigration every time he gets up in Prime Minister's questions, whenever he can get a question in.
Yeah, I think immigration was one of the things that was coming out from as soon as that exit poll came out, and we saw, obviously it turned out to be slightly inaccurate on the reform side. 13 reform MPs, we've got 5. That was the first thing I think a lot of us were thinking, right? What does this mean for Keir Starmer's immigration policy, which we know at best is a slightly different version of what the Conservatives are already doing with their Border Command Security Unit.
And they've scrapped Rwanda.
And they have effectively scrapped Rwanda. Keir Starmer confirmed that at his press conference yesterday. He said it's already dead and gone before the election was even held. But what does that mean in practice? Has he told all of his civil servants to stop working on that? Of course. So the flights won't take off, of course. But what does that mean for...
What a deal for Rwanda, what they've had. They've bagged the money and run.
Well, actually, Yvette Cooper a few months ago told us that they were going to be asking for a refund. So
good luck with that.
Good luck with that.
Yeah.
But also, what does it mean for the Bibi Stockholm? What does it mean for the Illegal Migration Act, which is still in place? People are still being detained at the moment. Are they going to be let go? Are they going to be looked at all of the cases again, which is what they've said? There's lots of unanswered questions.
And Tony Blair advising him this morning that he's got to get a grip on immigration, Sunday Times.
Exactly. I think that is going to be a big headache for them. But equally, it is probably not going to be the biggest headache for them.
There's plenty of others.
Not least the NHS, which obviously Wes Streeting is now going to be tasked with trying to fix. Him admitting just 2 days ago it is broken. He's going to have a huge job on his hands. And obviously Labour, the party, the NHS, they are going to be probably known for what they do on the NHS and how fast they can really show progress there.
Let's speak to somebody who was actually at the launch this morning, the co-host of the newsagents and LBC presenter, Lewis Goodall. Lewis, I saw you having a wonderful dust-up with Jacob Rees-Mogg, but I also saw you conversing with Nigel Farage, and I think that conversation was particularly interesting.
How does it feel to be once again at the centre of Conservative politics? They're all running away from you again, aren't they?
Oh, this is not Conservative politics. This is 10 members of Parliament, roughly, with an agenda that, actually...
Would you like this? Would you like all this?
Just say vote reform. These people are isolated. Liz Truss, Jacob Rees-Mogg are a tiny minority within the parliamentary party. The gap between the parliamentary Conservative Party and Conservative voters, I've never seen it wider in my lifetime.
Would you, there's all been this talk about you rejoining the party. Would it ever happen?
You must be joking.
It would never happen.
Not before the election.
After the election, would you consider it after the election?
It's not top of my bucket list. No. I'd like to see the Conservative Party replaced.
Replaced entirely by...
One of those once every 100-year events. Yeah.
And are you going to stand at the election?
Haven't decided. No, look, Labour are going to win the election. The question is what comes after the election. And ultimately, reform and some of these people in this room all need to be on the same side.
You railed against Davos, man. How much money did you make in the city? That rather is relevant.
That's such a childish question. I've never had anything to do with Davos, and I know that you've become a very left-wing broadcaster.
What will success for this project look like, Mr. Rees-Mogg?
What we're doing is talking about the ideas that conservatism needs. So it's a question of whether people find these ideas resonate with them. That will be success.
Is it not rather pathetic for members of a party, senior members of a party like yourself, who've been in government for 14 years, to rail against the system? If you don't mind my saying so, you sound rather left-wing. You sound rather like a sort of right-wing Bennite, constantly saying, power is the problem, institutions are the problem, they have to be changed.
No, I think you've got it fundamentally wrong. That we had no ability to change the system until we'd left the European Union. We then had COVID. And all parties at all times need to be thinking about the structures of government, how things work, how they operate. Because the way to get things done is through the structures of government. And sometimes they need changing, and they were changed very effectively by Tony Blair.
So you didn't have power to change the schooling system?
We did change the schooling system, as Liz Truss said. Perhaps you should have listened to her speech.
I did listen to it. And
she said one of the things we did successfully was in education.
And yet she talked about wokeism in schools. If there's wokeism in schools, your government could remove it at a stroke, surely.
Not at a stroke, no. You need to legislate, and new guidelines have been issued. So these things are moving in the right direction.
So what's the problem?
But we need to move further and faster. This is the whole life and blood of politics.
You railed against Davos, man. How much money did you make in the city? That rather is relevant.
That's such a childish question. I've never had anything to do with Davos, and I know that you've become a very left-wing broadcaster, but asking me lefty questions doesn't really get us anywhere.
It's not a matter of left or right. It's a matter of probing your position, Mr.
Rees-Mogg. I never had
Rees-Mogg.
anything to do with Davos.
But Davos, I would imagine what you're suggesting by talking about Davos is a
Is
sense
this
of a
level
man...
of internationalism?
Yes.
I'm in favour of the nation state, which was clear
Yes.
from my speech, if you'd listened.
I listened to every word you said, but
Not
it
very
still seemed to
carefully.
me, I listened extremely carefully, but it's possible and entirely appropriate that we try and probe
We're
some of
happy
the
to have a
intellectual
conversation.
positions. Good, good. I mean, it's not
But
one
you
of the
seem to be
problems.
representing the left wing. Are you doing your bit of due impartiality that Ofcom requires
Mr.
you? Or are
Mr.
you
Rees-Mogg,
here as a left-wing broadcaster?
Mr. Rees-Mogg, I know
I'm
that you're
very
rather...
interested in this, because
Mr.
this
Rees-Mogg,
comes up with GB News, which I broadcast
which
on.
of course is completely impartial. Mr. Rees-Mogg,
It meets the requirements of due impartiality, and I'm
well,
asking
not according
you
to
if you
Ofcom.
do.
Mr. Rees-Mogg, I know
I'm
that
quite
you want to go on the
interested.
attack rather than talking about the
Do
issues.
you meet the requirements of
If
due
you would allow to,
impartiality?
absolutely. And
Do you?
unlike GB News, of
So-
course,
so
which has
you're putting a
repeatedly...
strong left-wing
Mr.
view.
Rees-Mogg, I'm not putting a strong left-wing view of anything. I'm simply trying to ask you and
You seem
interrogate
to
you
be.
about some... No, not
seem
at all.
to be.
Well, according to
I've
your
got other
own
people
summary,
waiting, so
one more
do
question.
get to
Is
the
not
point.
one of the problems... Well, I would do if you allow me to actually ask
Now you're
a
waffling
question.
again. Please get to the point.
Honestly. Is not one of the problems that conservatives such as yourself have started to go down a track where you're not willing to accept trade-offs? Yes, we could pull out of all of these institutions and organisations, but ultimately there will be costs in so doing, just as there was with Brexit. And sometimes you start to talk about a world as you would like it to be, rather than the world as it is, which is exactly the sort of thing that conservatives used to be very good at addressing.
No, the Conservative Party has always been a practical party, and there are always trade-offs with doing one thing or another. But parties have to talk about ideas, otherwise they get nowhere. You seem to wish to live in an ideas-free zone. It's quite
An
extraordinary.
ideas-free zone? Not
That's
at all.
what you
I'm
seem to be
trying to
arguing for.
interrogate
Anyway, you
your
said that was the
position.
last question.
Indeed.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Rees-Mogg.
As you know, Nigel Farage is something of the sort of Pied Piper of modern conservative politics, because in so many different ways he has all of the different factions, the families, whatever you want to call it. You outlined some of them dancing to his tune, afraid of him. And what I thought was particularly interesting about it, actually, is that Farage, whatever you think about him, is a deeply astute observer of the political scene. And I think he identified what was so odd or perhaps eccentric about that gathering today, which is, of course, it's easy to be glib and make fun of this idea of a popular conservatism being led by Liz Truss, who, of course, remains an unpopular figure. But actually, what was so off-centre, literally eccentric about what they were saying, is that their ideas that they were extolling and talking about were either actually not very popular with the British public, i.e. cutting public spending, when all of the polls suggest actually the public, rightly or wrongly, want more public spending. But also, to be honest, their programme is quite off-centre, quite eccentric, talking about restoring the kind of pre-Blair constitutional settlement, talking about seeing, as you say, conspiracy behind bodies as seemingly mundane as the kind of National Trust or Natural England or whatever it happens to be. And Farage said to me, I think rightly, saying, well, you know, this might be conservative, but it's not certainly not very popular or indeed populist. And identified the fact that if you really wanted to shake the Sunak government up, what you'd probably go after him on is precisely what he is doing and what Reform is doing, which is about immigration, about which they barely mentioned.
And so, Lewis, very sort of briefly, the event itself, just your impression of it, the range of people there, a lot of well-known names. Lee Anderson was there, Jacob Rees-Mogg was there. But how many Tory MPs actually turned up to be spear carriers for Liz Truss this time?
There weren't many. Brendan Clark-Smith was there. Priti Patel came along. Several who were due to come, like Simon Clarke, were disinvited or chose not to come. So there weren't many. And I think what is interesting, Andrew, about Truss is that obviously her premiership was a catastrophe. She is choosing to embrace her sort of post-prime ministerial life, not by going into the shadows, but by being extremely visible. And I think she's making a bet, which I think probably will prove to be correct, which is that whether the Conservative Party likes it or not, whether the public like it or not, I suspect Liz Truss is going to be a more influential figure in the long term over the ideological course of the Conservative Party than, say, Rishi Sunak, assuming he loses the election and presumably is not going to be leader of the opposition. That Truss is setting herself up as a kind of ideological lodestar, a teacher in the Margaret Thatcher mould. My one critique of it would be to say that, unlike Margaret Thatcher, Liz Truss is not that keen, as you know, on conversing with people who disagree with her, or giving interviews to people who disagree with her.
She sure ain't. She sure ain't.
No, in that sense, it's a bit similar to Jeremy Corbyn or someone of that type, rather than Margaret Thatcher, who, as you know, wanted to get out there and proselytise.
Win her message. Really, really interesting thought to end on there, Lewis. Thank you so much for that. Really appreciate it.
You made some remarks to Novara Media about what children are being taught about sexuality. Just in case listeners haven't heard it, this is what you said.
No, 3 of my children go to school, a Catholic school in Scotland, so they have some protections for the moment, although the SNP government's threatening to remove some of those protections. But my other two school children are taught in England things that I don't want them to be taught, and at an age I don't want to be taught. That relations, that gay relationships are exactly the same and as normal as a mum, a dad, and kids. I want my children to be taught that the normal thing in Britain, in society across the world, is a mother, a father, and a family. I want them to be taught that there are gay people in the world and that they must be treated with respect and affection as I treat my own gay friends and colleagues with respect and affection. But I don't want my children to be taught that these things are equal, because I don't believe them to be equal. Apart from anything else, the human race would no longer exist. If it was normal, then it would be the end of humanity over a couple of generations.
So, Mr. Galloway, just to recap what you said there, I don't want my children to be taught that these things, i.e. gay relationships and heterosexual relationships, are equal because I don't believe them to be equal. We'll come back to the question of the other word you use, which is normality.
Well, we won't
but specifically on being
Lewis,
equal. Why aren't they equal?
Lewis, we won't actually come back to it because, first of all, that's not what this interview is about. You got this interview to talk about the election. Secondly,
you don't think that these are important remarks?
Lewis,
you're a leader of a party.
Lewis, this is a clip of a clip. It's an edited clip.
No, it's not. No, it's not an edited clip.
Yes,
no, it's not.
It is
a full 90 seconds of what you said.
No, it isn't. You clipped out the point about the 97 genders.
No. That's a separate question. You chose
agenda. You clipped it out.
Gender what?
Don't think I don't know what I said.
Gender we just played what you said, Mr. Galloway. We want to know.
You clipped it out. Look, I'm not going to have a Barney with you because
I don't want a Barney. I'm just trying to understand what you said.
I came on here to speak about the elections.
Of course.
Now you're ambushing me.
It's not an ambush, Mr. Galloway.
Edited clip.
It's not an edited clip.
So I've got
it's an unedited clip.
I've got a simple answer. Listen,
why aren't gay relationships equal to heterosexual relationships, Mr. Galloway?
Listen to the whole thing tonight.
Why? I've listened to the whole thing. I've listened to the whole thing. Why aren't?
You haven't given your
Mr. Galloway, you're not.
Thing.
No, you're misleading my listeners in saying that. You're misleading my listeners.
I'm sorry?
You're misleading my listeners in saying that because we have not edited the clip. That is a full 90-second exchange.
You did edit the clip.
No.
You cut out the transgender bit.
The transgender bit is separate. You were the one who chose to introduce. Yes, it is part of the longer 2.5 minutes.
I'm going to hang up now because
you don't want to explain yourself. It's not a fool. You're a politician. Oh, grow up, Mr. Galloway. Come on.
Or fool me thinking that your request that I come on and talk about the elections was genuine.
Of course, it was genuine. Well, there you go. You heard it there, Mr. Galloway refusing to answer a very, very simple question, and you can make up your own mind as listeners as to what you think about that. Look, we got through 2 interviews. Well, the second one hung up. So I suppose it's one way to start the show. We didn't necessarily anticipate it. You will have heard George Galloway there. I asked him about an interview he did the other day where he said that he didn't want his children to be taught that gay relationships are equal to heterosexual ones. He claimed before he hung up, as you heard there, that we were selectively editing the clip. We didn't edit the clip. There was a longer part of the clip, which I think, in fairness to him, just so you can hear it, so you know that we've been totally fair, because my contention to him was to say that what he was saying about sexuality and gender were quite separate. And I think if you listen to this full clip, which we're going to play you now, if you're still listening, Mr. Galloway, we're always fair on LBC, you will probably, I think, come to the same conclusion as me. Here's the full exchange that Navarro Media had with Mr. Galloway.
Well, I don't want my children prematurely sexualized at all. I don't want them taught that some things are normal when their parents don't believe that they're normal. Now, there's lots of things not normal. Doesn't mean you have to hate something that isn't normal. But if my children are taught that there's whatever the current Vogue number is, 76 or 97 or whatever the number of purported genders that exist, I don't want my children taught that.
But are they taught that?
Some of them are, yeah.
Because there's a huge gap here between saying, I think kids should be going to school and taught that, not all relationships look like a heteronormative couple, male, female. There's a huge gap between saying they should know that there's lots of LGBT people in the world is very diverse, that's what it looks like, and you're saying 96 genders. There's a big gap in between, isn't there?
Well, no, 3 of my children go to school, a Catholic school in Scotland, so they have some protections for the moment, although the SNP government's threatening to remove some of those protections. But my other 2 school children are taught in England things that I don't want them to be taught, and at an age I don't want to be taught. That relations, that gay relationships are exactly the same and as normal as a mum, a dad, and kids. I want my children to be taught that the normal thing in Britain, in society across the world, is a mother, a father, and a family. I want them to be taught that there are gay people in the world and that they must be treated with respect and affection, as I treat my own gay friends and colleagues with respect and affection. But I don't want my children to be taught that these things are equal, because I don't believe them to be equal. Apart from anything else, the human race would no longer exist. If it was normal, then it would be the end of humanity over a couple of generations.
So there you had it there. You heard the rest of the clip when I put it to Mr. Galloway before. It is indeed true Mr. Galloway started off by talking about gender, but as you heard there, he went on to start to talk about sexuality. And he made a very, very clear assertion that in his view, he did not believe that gay relationships and heterosexual relationships are equal. And I thought, as a leader of a party that has pretensions, he says, to sweep the board in all sorts of constituencies, that it would be of public interest to ask him on this matter that many people, in his saying that, would find grossly offensive, to justify those comments. People go, oh, beautiful countryside. It's like a bit of scrubland or something. It's like nothing there. There's a few trees and maybe a rabbit or 2. But you know what would be more beautiful and better? Actually building some houses where young people can actually live and have a life. And actually, some really beautiful streets are a lot more attractive than just a random field or 2, which, by the way, are as industrialised and as mechanised as any industrial site. Because guess what? That isn't what the countryside actually looks like when it's actually wild. It's like wooded and, forest, endless forest. But we got rid of all that because, people had to live here. If you don't build the houses and the infrastructure around it, you know what happens? Rural communities, they die. There's a story not long ago saying that lots of people were up in arms in a couple of villages or small towns because they were closing down the local school. Well, can you be surprised when you don't build enough houses so young families can move in and have kids in the area? You can't have it both ways. Build the houses or lose the infrastructure you have, like the schools, for example. I think Jonathan in Bishop Stortford wants to talk to me about this. Jonathan.
Yes, Lewis. I just cannot believe what you've said just before the break.
Oh, dear.
About you'd rather see swathes of houses rather than open fields.
I would.
I mean, what about the quality, Lewis, of people, the existing residents in those areas? It's not a race to the bottom. I mean, really, I can't believe that an LBC presenter is saying, oh, well, I'd much rather see thousands of houses on that land rather than trees. And I mean, we teach nature in schools. There'd be no point in teaching nature if we had your view.
No, Jonathan. I just think
there'd be no nature to talk about.
No, Jonathan. I'm not suggesting we tarmac the whole country. What I'm saying to you is that not all nature is created equal. I think the Yorkshire Dales or the North York Moors or the Lake District are a lot more attractive, frankly, than a lot of the sort of, I wouldn't even say it's particularly countryside, but sort of countryside adjacent land in much of the southeast of England, where a couple of fields. So what? On your basis, Bishop Stortford, right, your town, half of it wouldn't be there according to you, because you'd be like, no, we've got to prioritise the field at all costs, the wonderful little field.
No, because I roll into my equation, Lewis, is the quality of the life of the people that already live there.
And I roll into my equation.
2,000 cars in front of them in the morning.
And I roll into my equation, Jonathan, people who are younger, who perhaps aren't as fortunate to have been born 30 or 40 years before, when houses were much cheaper and houses were plentiful and you could pretty much buy where you want. At the end of the day, if you're going to have, you've got to think about the next generation. And in order to do that, in a country with an expanding population, where you need to ensure that enough houses are being built for them. Otherwise, I assume you own your home.
Problem.
Do you own your home?
No, but Lewis,
do you own your home, Jonathan?
Another problem. The problem that's causing this is too many people in the first place.
What, all the people coming in who've got to work in our social care, for example, looking after the older people?
We haven't got space for them.
So the old people will just let them perish without anyone looking after them then, shall we?
No, they could go other places.
Who, the old people?
Don't need to come here.
Who?
We're an island. Didn't you realise that? Got water all around us.
God, are we? God, I'd missed that one. God. I mean, you're learning so much. Jonathan, do you own?
You went to the coast.
Do you own your?
And now you want to build on what we've got.
Do you own your home?
On the small amount of land we've got. We're one of the smallest countries in the EU.
We're not in the EU anymore, Jonathan.
of course.
Do we? Do you own your own home?
Why does that matter?
Well, because I suspect, and it's just a theory here, I suspect that you might be labouring under the old "I'm all right, Jack" delusion.
I was never all right, Jack, and I'm not all right now, Lewis.
So you don't own your own home?
I'm just saying that what's the point in affecting people's lives? They have a right. People in existing areas have rights to quality of life as well.
And don't people
But you don't think they do?
I do, but I also think there needs to be a balance.
You want to build on their back gardens?
No, I want to build in the sort of pretty pointless bits of land that aren't particularly attractive that might be adjacent to their town or city.
And you know what? People use them for dog walking and everything else.
Oh no, that is important.
Themselves.
No, that is important. It is important that you have the right to use some random little field to walk your dog rather than ensuring that younger people, rather than ensuring that.
If that's what someone enjoys to do, Lewis,
and you know
have a perfect right.
And you know what? And you know what? I think that school leaver or someone at 21, 25, working hard, I think they have a right to own their own home. And I think that trumps your right to walk your dog.
No.
Oh, okay.
No,
so you get to own your house.
Misconception, Lewis. That's a misconception.
Do you own your house,
one
Jonathan?
Has the right
do you own your home? Do you own your home?
They only do it if they have the opportunity.
Do you own your own home?
Sorry?
Do you own your own home? You won't answer me.
Why is that important?
Because I think it may be colouring your view.
Why is that important?
Why is it important? Because I think you're a hypocrite, Jonathan. That's why. I think you're a hypocrite.
I think you're a hypocrite because you just want to build.
No, that's not hypocrisy. It's totally logically consistent. No, I want to liberate people. I think young people have the right to have what your generation had, which is the ability to buy.
You have the right to equality of life.
Where's that ladder? I think you might be pulling it out behind you. Where is it?
What?
Where's that ladder? You see what's above you there, Jonathan? You are pulling the ladder up. That is what you're doing. You're pulling the ladder up.
No, but you're ignoring the normal. Everybody has a quality of life, including those old crusties that you say have had it easy, that own their own home. They have a right to quality of life.
Yeah, I agree.
Having their back gardens
and I'm sure most people, most of them, Jonathan, I think a lot of them would recognise, because they've got kids and they've got grandkids, that they would want to see their children and their grandkids in a position where they can get an affordable home and a sort of quality of life that they enjoyed. I'm afraid your position just simply amounts to seeing the ladder and pulling it up behind you. It's as simple as that. Yes, it is. Yes,
we just don't want to be like India. We don't want 2 billion people in the UK, Lewis, where no one moves.
Oh yeah, because that's the binary, isn't it? Is that like we build on a couple of fields, or we get 2 billion people. That's it. All right, Jonathan. Grateful to you. Spirited discussion.